Welcome to Daily Dose of Aramaic Grammar Lessons. This is Lesson 6, Nouns, Part 2, State. More information on this topic can be found in Biblical Aramaic for Biblical Interpreters, pages 36 to 43. Let's get started. I've placed a notional noun on the screen. So you have the 3 dotted circles representing some root consonants, and this is noun A. Biblical Aramaic, just like Biblical Hebrew, can place nouns side by side. So we go ahead and place noun B after noun A and have these nouns interact in what's called a construct relationship, such that the meaning is like the genitive of many languages. A of B is an English approximation of this idea. Now, an important concept about how these nouns are relating as far as their form goes in a construct relationship is the final noun in a construct chain. So in this case, the be noun is going to show up in the absolute state. And what that means is that the absolute state is the basic form, the dictionary form, the lexical glossary form of the noun. However, preceding nouns, so in a two-member construct, the one preceding noun A, is going to be in the construct state. So already we have this concept from Biblical Hebrew that we're familiar with about the state of nouns being either absolute or construct. So we'll study more the differences between these states and form in a moment. But before we leave this A-B construct, we want to point out that the definiteness of the absolute state noun, the final noun in the construct chain, then determines the definiteness of the entire construct chain. So the result in this case, using the glow there on B to show that that's a definite noun, is the A of the B. So even though A, just reading it on the page, does not have a marker of definiteness, the fact that it's in construct relationship with B and that B is the final noun in the construct chain means that A is just as definite as B. And this doesn't depend on length. So if we had a 3-member construct, the final noun, let's say the C noun, would then determine the definiteness of the entire chain. So there are basically 2 kinds of construct as far as the definiteness of it goes. We either have the indefinite construct chain, where the meaning would be something like A of B, or an A of AB if it's important for a understanding perspective from English to stick in the English indefinite articles. Or, on the other hand, there's the definite construct chain, which we have just looked at, the A of the B, where definiteness is determined by, in this case, the B noun. So let's look at an actual indefinite construct in Biblical Aramaic, bar enash, where bar is A, enash is B. A of B. Well, this is son of man, a theologically important term from Daniel 7. There are Hebrew equivalents of this construct in Hebrew passages in the Hebrew Bible. And then, of course, the New Testament brings up this concept. And here's an example of a definite construct chain. So the A of the B, how do we know this is definite? Well, given that the B nouns are demonyms, so we're talking about people, this is proper nouns. So therefore we have the law of the Medes and the Persians. So it's not a law, it's the law, where the B nouns in this case, and I'm calling them B only and not saying C, because that conjunction there is basically putting both of those nouns under the heading of B. So the law of the Medes and the Persians is the right way to take this definite construct chain. All right, so we remember the B noun is in the absolute state and the A noun is in the construct state. So if we graphically display the kinds of suffixes that signal these relationships, this is the result. So on the top, we have singular nouns. So let's go through them. We notice that the masculine singular nouns in absolute and construct form are the same. This is to be expected at least from the absolute noun perspective, because masculine nouns have no special marking for gender or number in the masculine singular. Let's look down at masculine plural nouns now. The absolute ending for masculine plural nouns is een, hirakiod, noon. And then, interestingly, just as in Biblical Hebrew, the masculine plural construct suffix ending is tsere, yod. Well, now let's look on the upper right at the feminine singular nouns. Kametz he is the normal feminine singular noun suffix. And then in the construct form, it becomes at. And this is so similar to Biblical Hebrew, the construct form of the feminine singular noun. So let's look at the bottom right now. This is the most different from Biblical Hebrew, because in Biblical Hebrew, these suffixes would both be ot, the cholam vav and the tav, but the feminine plural absolute noun ending is the kametz noon, and then we have an at ending. So from a pronunciation standpoint, obviously the feminine singular construct and feminine plural construct are going to sound the same, but it's important to note that vowel difference. Well, let's go back for a moment to ask, we talked about the definiteness of the final noun in a construct affecting the definiteness of the whole construct chain. Well, we need to know how Biblical Aramaic expresses definiteness. So here's our notional noun, and we remember, of course, that Hebrew expressed definiteness by attaching the article, if it wasn't definite already by definition, by being a proper noun. Okay, so hey patach dagish. Well, in contrast, there's no prefix. There is a suffix that performs a similar function in Aramaic. It's the kametz aleph suffix that places the noun in the determined state. So you see, this is a different grammatical category that Aramaic is using. So technically speaking, this is not an article. Okay, so Biblical Aramaic technically doesn't have an article. It has a state to express definiteness. Now, that having been said, the concept of definiteness in Biblical Aramaic and Biblical Hebrew are very similar. It's just we need to remember that this is a different grammatical category, and so it's going to interact with other grammatical categories differently. Well, and another thing to recognize is we're going to see an interchange of that kametz aleph and kametz he, as we've seen before. So notice Daniel 2:11. The thing that the king asks is difficult and no one can show it to the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh. The very same word interchanges the expected kametz aleph suffix with kametz he. Now, we've already seen kametz he, right, as the feminine singular, and of course absolute state, suffix for a noun. But we did say when we covered it that it's possible that it could interchange with kametz aleph. So sort of the reverse is true, in that the standard kametz aleph ending is the marker of the definite state for a noun, but it could show up as a kametz he, as it does in actually both forms in Daniel 2:11. So there's a small amount of ambiguity possible here, and we just need to use context to figure out if we have a kametz he ending or a kametz aleph ending, which meaning is intended per the context. Okay, now another function of definiteness that we should just note almost in passing is the vocative function. So notice these kametz aleph endings here of the determined state, saying to you, O peoples, nations, and languages. So it could have been saying to you, O peoples, O nations, O languages, right? So just as the Hebrew article can have a vocative function in context, so the determined state likewise can do that in Biblical Aramaic. And here's the example of that. So context will tell us which function the determined state has. Is it giving a determination to the noun or making it vocative? So since we've been talking about definiteness in Biblical Aramaic as a state, well, obviously we're going to have to compare it now to the absolute and construct states, right? So first, let's concentrate on singular nouns because of space on the screen considerations. So as we have said before, the masculine singular noun ending is Kametz Aleph. That's the basic determined state. Now, what we see when we look at the feminine singular noun is the same thing. It's adding a Kametz Aleph suffix, but what's it adding it onto? It's adding it onto the construct state version of the feminine singular noun. That's what's happening in the masculine singular noun as well. It's just that the construct form is the same as the absolute form in the case of masculine singular nouns. So note that to form the determined state, Biblical Aramaic places Kametz Aleph after the construct form of the noun. Now let's get some examples. And we'll use just the simple masculine noun melech, king. So notice, as we've seen in our passages so far, malka means the king or O king. And of course, it also could mean queen, because Kametz he would be the normal feminine singular suffix that could interchange with Kametz Aleph. So we have to use context to determine what actually that word would mean, because there is a possible word, malka, that means queen. Okay, so we've talked about the singular nouns and their determined state in comparison to absolute and construct. Well, what about the plural nouns? Let's look at them now. The formation of the plural nouns determined state is the same. We're adding a Kametz Aleph onto the end of the construct state. So notice the masculine plural construct sereyod. There has to be some vowel adjustment, but the result is adding the Kametz Aleph gives you that yod that's already there plus the Kametz Aleph. Okay? And similarly, adding a Kametz Aleph onto the Kametz Tav that was already there in the feminine plural construct results in what we see on the screen for that ending. In every case, in every permutation, every combination of gender and number, adding Kametz Aleph gives the determined state. It's just that it's built off of the construct state. That's why we need to discuss state so intently here. And what's an example? Well, I've chosen, because it shows up in each of these states, the word for finger or toe. So on the top, that's fingers with Kametz nun. And then we have fingers of, because of course this is going to be in a construct relationship with some other noun, where there's the ot ending. And then we have the fingers on the bottom with the determined state ending. Well, that was a quick tour through the different states of nouns in Biblical Aramaic. And a really important thing to understand is that unlike Biblical Hebrew, definiteness is communicated through a determined state. And sort of a footnote to that is some resources call it the emphatic state or even the definite state. That's acceptable to have different names for the state, but determined state seems to be the majority terminology for this state of Aramaic. So the three states, absolute, construct, and determined state of nouns in Biblical Aramaic. The determined state being formed by Kametz Aleph being added onto the construct state of the noun in question. Well, thanks so much for your time for Lesson 6, Part 2. We'll see you in Lesson 7.